Okay, I think I'm going to call this a journal video on Vespasian. I've still got to do part 6. But I'm finding stuff out now that's kind of important. I feel I ought to reference. This is a Luke Dateline Meters piece again, because that's kind of becoming my central place where all the latest updates for links and the Bible book meters and everything summarized are going to be stored, because it's so handy. And what I've been doing is I've been checking what I've told you before in my previously posted videos about these dates to see if they're really right or if I screwed up somewhere, because I'm sure I have. It's just a question of where. And in the process of doing that, I got to Titus, and it occurred to me, you know what, I need to get back to checking on, the flow of events with Vespasian, because what's important here about Titus, maybe I ought to magnify it more. Let's do it at 300 for the moment. Okay, see, here's Titus. Sorry that this is so disjointed looking, but it is kind of important. Maybe I want to not do that. Okay, here's Titus. And we just look at him. Okay? Titus was written summer of 72, which turns out to be really important. It's AD 66. Okay, we know it's the summer because right here, the date line that Paul is using is saying that he's writing 133 divided by 2 after when the Lord should have been born in 4106. Okay, well, 133 divided by 2 is 66.5. 0.5. If the Lord should have been 66 and a half years old, that means Paul is writing in the summer of AD, just after June 25th. It does become this important. Okay? Just between June 25th and, say, first week of July. No later than the first week of July. Okay, that accounts for why he's using so many Roman numbers. Judea had been a Roman province for 59 and a half years at that point. Okay? The Lord should have been 66 and a half. He uses the 66 meter bluntly. He couples it with chronology to remind Titus that, all the news that's going to start coming down. Because it hasn't come down yet. That's the important thing here. All the news that's going to start coming down. Just remember, he is the eternal life. He is the meaning of time. Translating chronon, ionion kind of loosely, but it's a nickname for Christ here. And that's where this 66 meter is occurring. Okay? Bear in mind that this has been an established style now. When they use the Lord's age, the text that they use it with is either his own name bluntly or a nickname for him, or something closely associated with him. Okay, then the other meters that Paul used was 119 years prior to when he writes, Crassus sacks the temple. It's really important. 133 years after, before Paul writes, was when Hyrcanus II came into power. Okay, or actually when he lost power. And 147 years before Paul writes. In other words, he's linking back to parallel events in history so that Titus gets a read on how to read the text Paul's writing him. That was the end of the social war, which was considered by the Romans. They're like, never again. That's one thing they always want to avoid is a social war. This is why Caesar ended up having power, because they didn't want to descend into civil war. So when he crossed the Rubicon, they just caved in. Okay? I don't know if there's any ellipsis, but that's not the point of this video. The theme is husband the rebelling house of God. Now, what's the historical underpinning here? Well, I put a link because you're going to need to read it. Per Josephus, in Barbara Levick's book on Vespasian, and in her book, it's pages 27 through 29. She's citing Josephus, though, and that's the link so you can read Josephus yourself. The whole business with Florus trying to take taxes from the temple provoked a huge uprising in Jerusalem. That was occurring in May through September when Paul writes. Okay? Paul is writing from around Thrace, Macedon, maybe even Antioch. It's real important to know where he was. He was not in Rome when he writes Titus. He was free. This thing erupts in Jerusalem, at the temple in Jerusalem. And in this particular set of skirmishes, the Romans lost, and that's a really big deal. Romans aren't used to losing at this point. The Jews won against the Romans, and it went on from May to September, the fighting. There was huge slaughter of Roman soldiers by the Jews, which means that the Jews were better soldiers. That's really important to understand. As a result of this, there was a concern about the thing erupting into an empire-wide problem with Jews who were living everywhere in the Roman Empire. Okay? Nero was also, see, maybe like with Paul, in Greece. Nero was in Greece. He had just left well, let's see. Yeah, Nero was in Greece in October. So in May to September, this is happening. Nero was in Rome during this time. But he was in Rome putting down what he felt were conspiracies against him personally. And a lot of senators fell, and there was all kinds of problems going on. By October, the following month after this thing was going on, okay, Nero was in Greece to escape Rome. Okay, he was in Greece. That was in October. This is all in the Levick book. Okay, because she was, synthesizing the timeline. Nero was in Greece. Okay, that's near where Paul was. When I say near, I mean, it could be a couple of 100 miles. But it's still in the same part of the continent. Vespasian was also in Greece at the time. This is after October, sometime after October. Nero gets it's recommended to Nero that he appoint Vespasian to put down this rebellion that's going on in Jerusalem. So sometime after October, I'm not sure when yet, Nero sent Vespasian to put it down. But it didn't happen right away. Vespasian didn't leave right away. There were a lot of complications. Okay? And Vespasian, therefore, and this is really important, got as far as Antioch by 1 March of 67. 1 March 67. This is all in the Levick book. That's why I'm making this video now. I just read it. Okay, so Paul had written in the summer. Some of this would have been known, pretty much around the Roman Empire as gossip by the time he writes in the summer. What was not known at that time was that the Jews would win against Roman soldiers. That's real unusual. Okay. They took over the temple, they took over the fortress, they destroyed the links with the Antonia fortress, and they managed to, defend themselves there. And Florus he had like 2,000 troops, couldn't do anything. And then Agrippa sent reinforcements, and they couldn't do anything. Okay, so the Jews are all holed up there, the Jews who are rebelling. Okay, and that's why Nero finally sends Vespasian. But Nero's in Greece, Vespasian's in Greece, Paul is somewhere on that subcontinent. Because that was his circuit. It was between Greece and Asia Minor. And Vespasian gets to Antioch by March of 67. He hadn't yet even gotten to Jerusalem because there were all kinds of problems with him actually going. Okay, because there was a new governor in Syria named Mucianus, and there was a problem about how those two guys are going to work together. And that had to be settled first before Vespasian could do anything. Okay, so 1 March of 67 is just before the vernal equinox begins. So now let's look at 2 Timothy, because 2 Timothy is written March of AD 67. We know that because in order for Paul to pull off this kind of math here, he's got to be writing at the end of 4173. The end in vernal terms. Okay, vernal equinox is in March, the end of a year and the beginning of a year. Okay? So he's got to be writing at the end of 4173 vernal in order for this math to work. So that's why I'm confident saying that he's writing in March of AD 67. Okay, using the same style of as Acts, and there's the doc where you can go, that's actually the videos on it. You can go look it up. You can go watch the videos if you want. Okay, so he's writing at the very start of the vernal year, which is AD 67, or he's writing at 72 vernal end, which is also AD 67. So you've got a choice between March of AD 67, third week of March, or a choice of third week of March AD 67. It's that precise. Okay? The math only works if that's when he writes. Well, now you can see causality. How did he get arrested? If Vespasian is getting there in Antioch, and his job is to put down the Jews, okay, and Paul is a Jew, okay, and Paul's stomping ground was Antioch, and he had a lot of enemies, okay, he had a lot of enemies. So if Vespasian is getting there on the 1st of March, you can just bet that by the 3rd week of March, someone had denounced Paul, and he would have been incarcerated. Now here's the kicker. When Paul writes to Timothy, he's in Rome. He's not in Greece. He's not in Antioch. He's not in anywhere but Rome. He's writing from Rome. Now, if the military, because they're very fast, it would take maybe a week to travel, depends on, if he's going. Troops are moving. Bear in mind, troops are moving from Rome down to Jerusalem. You can move by sea, you can move by land. Paul could have gotten to Rome within 2 weeks, easily. Okay, especially if he's under armed escort, especially if he got arrested. Okay, and he could have gotten arrested well before 1 March when Vespasian got there. Because Nero sent Vespasian sometime, I'm not sure when, after October. So the word would have gotten out all over Greece, all over Asia Minor. Oh, they're sending some guy Vespasian to round up the Jews. Yeah, and so your local magistrates are going to go, okay, well here, we're going to curry favor with Nero and with the guy who's coming, the Vespasian, by rounding up the Christians or any prominent Jews we can find. See, they did that because there was this real, genuine concern that there would be rebellion all over the Roman Empire by Jews. Because that's what happened. All right, Alexandria was already erupting. So it's no stretch whatsoever to say, okay, between October and March, somebody, what do you want to call it, ratted on Paul, represented him as a Jew, and they didn't care about the difference between Christian and Jew. There was a temple, it was Jerusalem. Paul was a famous Jew. He was a famous Jew among the Jews, and he was a famous Jew among the Christians. Somebody would have ratted on him, turned him in. in order to get, a little bit of payment or favors or something. So it's no stretch at all to understand why he's in Jerusalem, and he's already had his first defense by the time he writes 2 Timothy. That's no stretch at all, because this was front and center on Nero's agenda. Now Nero he didn't get back to Rome until sometime in 67. I still have to figure out when he got back. But the point is that from October, see, because of the fight, from October, this was front and center on Nero's agenda. Vespasian was dispatched. I'm not sure what month after October or whether it was in October, but October to March, that's not a stretch. That's easy to understand. So it's easy to understand how Paul could be saying in March of 67 that he's arrested and nobody came to his defense. Now, I'm going to close by saying one thing I shouldn't have to say. The stupid, disgusting church fathers all claim that Peter and Paul died in 64. And all those people who say, oh, tradition, tradition, tradition. Well, if your tradition is a lie, why do you want to follow tradition? Paul can't be writing 2 Timothy in 67 if he's dead. And it's understandable why he was arrested a second time. So all those trying to contend that Paul died in 64, they don't do their Bible homework because they sure don't know this meter, okay? But they wouldn't even have to, because his first imprisonment, he got out. We have Bible books telling us he got out. We got the book of Acts at its end. We got 1 Timothy. We got Titus, okay? And Titus also helps us understand why he got rearrested. And therefore, in 2 Timothy, not 1 Timothy. He was out of jail when he wrote 1 Timothy. In 2 Timothy, it's AD 67. Okay? AD 67. And here's your proof from the meter. Okay? So all those people trying to tell you that Paul and Peter were dead by AD 64 cannot read Bible. And frankly, if they have any degrees, those degrees should be taken away from them. Now, one last comment. I said you can get, this is in Vespasian by Barbara Levick. That's her. This is the book I got. Okay, it's the paperback version. And you can get it used. Actually, I got the hardback. I'm sorry, I got the hardback. The hardback's cheaper than the paperback. I got the hardback for about 20 bucks. Okay? Or if you want, you can pay Amazon $114. Why? I don't know. Okay? So there's the book, but you can't search on its pages 27 and 28. That book is linked right in here. See, right here. The book is linked. Okay? And, like I said, Josephus' War is linked. And the link that you'll see there is right here at ccel.org. And these are the guys that maintain that Paul was dead in 64. So I guess they can't read Josephus either. Okay. So here you go. This is your link to Josephus. All right? I'm sorry to be so, what do you want to call it, nasty? But 2,000 years of bad scholarship, it's about time it got cleaned up. You claim to be a Christian and you support bad scholarship by saying, well, tradition says that Paul was killed in 64. Then you should just be fired. Do you want to face God when you're dead? With that over your head? Oh, gee, you could have checked it. Here's 1 Timothy and Titus, and Acts had even ended it that way. And oh, now you have 2 Timothy, and you have all this proof of when Paul wrote is a definable style that is predictable every time. The authors are always using the same formulas. 2,000 years, the hoary heads didn't know this, but a brainout can know it. Do you know how embarrassing that is? And I'm sure, anybody who's got the initials after his name is going to say, well, you have to be wrong because you don't have credentials. Honey, I don't need credentials. All I need is to count syllables. And they were taught, 5-year-old kids were taught that. It isn't my material. These aren't my syllables. Any 10-year-old can count syllables. That's what we were taught to do, even in English class, what a syllable was in 4th grade. So if you didn't count your syllables, then you better start counting them now. Because you know what? There are only so many syllables left in your life. And do you want to face God knowing you didn't do this? I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's about time that all the incompetent Christian scholarship get turned over. Peace out. Let's now continue with the chronology on Vespasian. By March, 1st March, Vespasian had reached Antioch. Paul was already in Rome. Paul had already been before the magistrate in Rome. Did he appeal to Caesar and that's why he was in Rome? Possibly. But he had lost his first defense. In any event, we can tell that the reason why he ended up getting arrested again is because of all that hassle that was happening between May and September in Jerusalem. And it was of a big concern to Nero in particular, but elsewhere in Rome, that Jews all over the Roman Empire would rebel and set up all kinds of insurrections all around the empire because of what was happening in Jerusalem. The Jews had won against Cestius, who was in charge at Jerusalem. Cestius had died. Gallus, who had been the governor of Syria, got replaced. And there was a new replacement named Mucianus. And he and Titus Vespasian were somewhat at odds. Meanwhile, Vespasian had been in Greece and Nero was in Greece. Sometime after October, which means that it was like within a month after this insurrection was seen to have failed. And somebody recommended Vespasian to Nero, and Nero appointed him. But it took, which is totally unusual, that it would go from October, of course we don't really know if he was appointed in October, but that it would go from October to March for Vespasian to even get to Antioch from Greece is ridiculous. I mean, you're talking like 4 or 5 days travel from Antioch to Greece, from Greece to Antioch. Say from Athens, where our boy Nero was playing the lyre. Okay, it was 5 days, unless you were like walking really slow with a donkey overland, taking the U up the coast, and not going across by sea, which of course you would do. So there was some kind of delay there, or Nero didn't appoint Vespasian right away. The point is that by the time Paul's in Rome, Vespasian's in Antioch, which is where Paul had just been. He had just been there. He was in Macedon, one of the two. And somebody turned him in. Because Nero wasn't sitting at court. That was one of the things when I did this 2 Timothy video, I was wondering, when did Nero go back to Rome? Well, I just finished reading in the Levick book, which I already quoted down here so you can read her for yourself. Okay? And her page 37. See, because this is pages 27 through 29. I'm only at page 37 now because I've been thinking about it. In her page 37, that's the beginning of 68, and the Senate had asked Nero to leave Greece and come back to Rome. So between March 67 and March 68, a whole lot happened. And that's what I want to cover in this video. Again, this is like a journal entry. March of 67, Vespasian arrives in Antioch. March of 67, Paul's already in Rome and has lost his first defense. March of 67, Nero's still in Greece playing the lyre. March of 67, a whole bunch of troops are on their way toward Jerusalem or actually in Asia Minor, because Vespasian is visiting some of the troops to make sure that they got the right supplies and introduce himself as the new commander and, all those kinds of things. So that month of March is really busy. Everybody's getting ready for something. By April, a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, according to Levick, Vespasian's already on his way, or has arrived at, the northern part of Israel and starts subduing the little towns. By Tammuz, which is like third week of July, okay, third week of July, third week of August is Tammuz. Third week of August, third week of September is Elul, which is the end of the Adamic year, 6th month of the sacred year. So therefore, between March and August, or July really, Vespasian has done such a good job of subduing so many of the towns. And by this point, he's accompanied by Agrippa and some of the other guys who all brought their troops because they want to look good and look like allies for Rome, like Antiochus of Commagene and stuff like that. Bernice was around. She was already in Jerusalem, actually. By August of 67, that's a year before Peter writes, Paul is still alive. So between the 3rd month on our calendar and the 8th month on our calendar, 5 months, most of the area north of Jerusalem, as he's cutting off the passes, has been pretty much subdued. One of those areas was Jopata, and one of the defenders was Josephus. And this is where Josephus meets Vespasian and ingratiates himself with him. Tells him that the word of God says that he's going to be the next emperor. And yes, the word of God did say it. Specifically, Paul, the guy who's just gone to Rome, said it 10 years prior. Well, in the 10th year prior, which Peter's going to refer to in 1 Peter. Peter's going to do a whole reprise of the emperors, starting with Vespasian, at the very text Paul used for Augustus, writing in August. Okay, and I did those videos on that already. So you can see how deft that was. That he's turned his text, interleaved it with Paul, starting at the same place. Eulogetas Opteos Kaipater to Kuriou Chaimon Yesu Christo. Okay, that's it. That's in one of Ephesians 1:3. Peter starts out his text in his verse 3 the same way. I think it's verse 3 or verse 4. Okay, I should show it to you. So I'm just trying to set the mental stage of what's going on here. Okay, let's really increase the size of view. There we go. That's pretty big, isn't it? Here's verse 3 of Peter, 1 Peter. See, same text as Paul. Well, I could shorten it. Okay, he's quoting Paul at Ephesians 1:3. Here's 1:3 and Paul's 1:3. So this is Paul's text. That's why it's in lighter blue. And then Peter's interleaving this. Hokata topolau tueleos. Anagenesas hemas. And this is starting with Vespasian. Peter's writing in August of 68. So the question is, what does he know in August of 68? Well, he knows it from God, of course. Okay? That's August of 68. I'm still trying to fill in August of 67. By August of 67, Vespasian has already met Josephus. That's a year prior to when Peter writes. So you could argue, well, that's not particularly prophetic. Yeah, except that Vespasian hadn't declared for emperor, and there was a big debate with the Romans. The Roman historians, when did Vespasian first have pretensions? Okay, well, back here in August of 67, 5 months after Paul has written Timothy, Josephus is busy telling Vespasian. You want to talk about pretensions? The pretentious Josephus is telling Vespasian, hi, the word of God says that you're going to be emperor next. Yeah, Paul had already predicted that for the very same syllables. Okay, through 66 through 673. See, right here. This is beginning to kill me. This is, it's fun to try to defend Bible accuracy, but when you see it be this accurate, it stops being comfortable anymore. Okay, this is page 10 on the potential rapture dates that Paul was plotting. And I converted them to AD kind of the wrong way, but that's okay for now. It's year 66 trib midpoint. And if I can get to the bottom of the page, that was page 10 in case you want, page 19 in case you want to read it. Paul's prediction about our boy Vespasian, because remember this was written in 58 AD. Okay, starts right here. This is the period in history that I'm trying to recap. 66 to 73, and I'm right at the period for Vespasian. See, that's 66, that Cosmo. The Mu is year 66, 66 AD. 67, 68. Okay, so here's 67. Ine, of course, is an infinitive, but I like to parse it because it's so funny. If, nay, yes. If yes. This is 67, the if part. That's what I'm covering. Okay, so at the if part, it's 67. 5 months into the vernal of 67, Josephus meets Vespasian. And it's largely due to Josephus that we have the information we have. Okay, because all the other Roman historians are kind of summary about it, except Tacitus writes a little more about the military. Okay, you got Cassius, and not much of him survives. And then you got Tacitus, Suetonius, and a couple others who are contemporaneous. And Tacitus is really, 40 years later. So our boys are talking just after Paul has lost his first defense. And the very guy who lost his first defense was in Rome, and Vespasian wanted to be in Rome, but kept on being in the outposts. Vespasian is now sent to the armpit named Judea, and is there from April. He had gotten there, physically gotten to Judea. And by August, He's being told by Josephus that the word of God says he's going to be emperor. So when did those pretensions begin? They have to have started there. Because why wasn't Josephus killed? Well, Josephus was kind of valuable. He was in charge of the fortifications, and so he knew a whole lot about where everybody was hiding and how to defend against it and what to do. But hey, you see how closely this is tracking? Okay, and Paul's cooling his heels, knowing he's going to die. All right? From August of 67, okay, onward, it's basically a waiting game as far as Vespasian is concerned, because he's got a guy named Mucianus, who's the governor of Syria. He's got a lot of difficulties to work out with him. He's got plenipotentiary powers granted specifically by Nero, and it's specifically written out, so that would explain why Quirinius could collect the tax and be deemed governor of Syria, even though that's not the term that Luke used. Vespasian had those same powers, okay, specifically granted by Nero for purposes of putting down the rebellion. So that tells you that Quirinius would have had power specifically for the purpose of collecting the tax, but he has the rank that's equal to that of a governor in order to have the authority to present himself at Antonia Fortress and to Herod and say, "Hi, I am charged with collecting the tax," because Herod was dying back in 4 BC. Now I say that because there's a whole lot of really stupid people on the internet who say, well, Quirinius couldn't have done it. He wasn't governor of Syria until AD 6. You didn't have to be governor as a political office. You just had to have the rank sufficient to collect the tax. And if we saw Vespasian having a specific rank that kind of put him in Dutch with the governor of Syria, because it was the same rank, before the governor of Syria, took over. Because the governor of Syria doesn't arrive. Okay, he doesn't arrive until November of 67, Mucianus. So Vespasian, between August and November, is sort of the only guy in town. And there's a speculation among Roman historians as to whether he too had actual governorship powers. But the documents they've got show that he had military rank that was equal to governorship. So maybe he ruled through that. That's what they're speculating. So between August and November of 67, not a whole lot is happening. There's a kind of delay because the replacement governor has to get there. And he didn't get there until November. Mucianus. And Mucianus and Vespasian are going to have problems with each other because their patrons are kind of, there's a problem there. All right. And then they also both have a problem with Nero, because they have to owe their offices to Nero. And so now you got one patron that's Nero, effectively, and another patron that are enemies of Nero. What do you do? Okay. Because they're considered underlings vis-a-vis their patrons. And they got to work things out with each other. Meanwhile, Mucianus isn't there yet. So all Vespasian can do is sort of like get the lay of the land. So he's getting a lot of contact with Josephus. He's negotiating with the various factions amongst the Jews. He's doing all kinds of things. But one thing he's not doing is he's not investing Jerusalem. What he was told to do by his advisors was to invest Jerusalem. And what he said to them, because he found out that the Jews who were in Jerusalem, holding it, having control, they were fighting with each other, the extremists versus the less extreme. He says, let them fight, and then they'll defect, and we'll get our information from the defectors and let them hurt themselves first. Because he was going to economize on, how much it was going to cost and how much hassle he was going to go through. And he went through some big hassle with some of the outlying towns. And he didn't want to, waste his troops. He didn't want to repeat the losses of Cestius, and he didn't want to repeat the losses of Gallus. So that accounts for this delay going on. So now you come to, and I got to sort of like put it in the middle here. Civil War is our next theme. That was the theme that Paul wrote to Timothy about. 1st and 2nd Timothy. It's been a running theme since back here, since Acts. And then Paul gets out, because that's how Acts ends, with Paul getting out. And then 1 Timothy was about contend for the doctrine, avoid contenders who are contra doctrine. That was that whole thing, about who do you appoint for church. The same kind of theme was in Titus. And it's through Titus that we realize, it was Nero who sent Vespasian. Okay? I realize that the screen is kind of boring, but it helps you to see that this is real history happening to real people who are really in the Bible. And this is the historical backdrop of these Bible books. So right here in the middle, while Christians are busy polarizing, and Jerusalem is busy polarizing, and everybody's busy taking sides. Okay? From March AD 67 to March AD 68, when Paul is probably executed, Vespasian is basically, through August, he was, defeating the outlying areas around the northern part of Jerusalem, northern part of Israel. Okay? From August to November, he's sort of doing reconnaissance, and there are other little skirmishes and stuff like that. He's getting his information from Josephus, and he's sort of doing more cleanup. But he's really waiting for Mucianus to arrive. Mucianus arrives in about November of 67. So from November of 67 until March of 68, that was probably the preoccupation, was to coordinate with Mucianus. Now here's what's happening that's so critical here to this story. In March of 68, while the Christians are warring with each other, and they're getting disaffected, and there's this trouble with the Jews, and they're getting disaffected, and everybody's cannibalizing each other. In March of 68, what happens? But Vindex, way over in Lugudunum, Lugudensis, or whatever the heck it is, what we would call France. Okay, up sort of almost central France, maybe not quite central. He writes a letter which should have, according to Roman historians who are debating this, probably should have reached our boy Vespasian if he got it at all. That's what they're not sure of. March 9th of 68. Vindex says, hi, let's all of us Roman troops declare against Nero. Well, at that point, at the beginning of 68, Nero was back in Rome because the Senate said to him at the end of 67 or at the beginning of 68, hightail it back here, we need you. So Nero was not back in Rome until 68, and it was very much somewhere at the beginning, January, February, March. Probably February or January, because he was in Rome when Vindex sent this little missive around to all of our friendly troops, including, and of course the one guy who responded, Spain, which was held by Galba and another guy who's an old friend of Nero's, but Nero married the guy's wife, Poppaea. Otho, a guy named Otho. Otho was in charge of a little province to the left of the province that our boy Galba was in charge of. Okay? And so both of those guys decided, you know what, we're going to listen to Vindex, and we're going to say yes. And so Galba declared himself to be the next emperor on April 8 of 68. He brings Otho along, makes this really slow march toward Rome with his troops. Well, apparently that provoked quite a lot of stir. And meanwhile, Vindex, with his big mouth, okay, 2 weeks after Galba declared or so, in April, sometime, it was 5 weeks total from his little letter of March 9th until he's dead. And he was killed by Virginius Rufus. Okay, Galba is still marching, but Galba is now wondering, am I going to get killed myself? And he's marching just the same toward Rome, very slowly with a couple of legions, trying to gather more. Very rich guy, so he can afford to pay him. So that gives him a big chance of success, and he keeps on going. That's in March of 68. That's how 4174 Vernal began. Now you can just understand that. The point of this video, I'm sorry it's taking so long. You can just understand then that in light of that kind of talk, first of all, of course, Nero back in Rome is all, first of all, at first he doesn't believe it, and then he starts to get nervous. And it's kind of like the domino effect that led up to World War I and II. Okay, everybody starts jumping on the bandwagon. Yeah, let's put down Nero. Okay, so by, April, party month in the Roman Empire, by April, people are starting to think, this is a really pretty good idea. So you can start to understand why Paul would be dead. Because it's like, well, let's kill all the prisoners we got now. Okay? So there's no chance for Paul. He's dead by then. He's already incarcerated, but just kill him. That'll show those Jews a lesson. Of course, Paul is not a Jew. I mean, he's a Jew, but he's not a Jew. He's a Christian. But they consider that just two versions of Judaism, factions. Kill him, get rid of him. Paul's dead. He's got to be dead by party month. Because that's all they do is party. I forget the name of the ludi that they have, but it's like pretty much most of the month. You can just kiss it goodbye. All right. So that's party month. So during party month in April, Galba is marching toward Rome, but very slowly. And Nero's fiddling again, playing the lyre, being in the contest and all that stuff. And he's alternately nervous and not nervous. Okay? And everybody around the Roman Empire is saying, you know what, this sounds like a good idea. Galba's rich, he's a nice guy. He's a little old, so he's not going to be there long if we don't like him. Okay, April 68. So you just know that by the end, Peter was in Babylon. That's 2 months from Rome to Babylon. I mean, not particularly. Oh, bloody hell. That's 2 months that he would have gotten the letter. So that's why I'm saying, well, actually, his own dating is that he's writing in August. But, that's not far-fetched at all. But if it's 2 months and he's writing in August, then, and it's at the end of August, okay, almost September, really. All of August, all of July. So the latest Paul could have been killed would have been June. But I don't think it was that late, because by the time Peter gets this, Nero himself is dead. So from April until June 8th, okay, Nero was alive, and there was like, oh, we're going to get rid of, the enemies of Nero. Okay, but on June 8th of 68, June 8th, the Senate said, you know what, we vote for Galba to replace Nero. Well, Nero gets so nervous, he goes running into his palace to hide, and he kills himself. Well, he tries to kill himself on June 9th, but he ends up having his servant, Titus, or whatever the guy's name was, help kill him. So on June 9th, 68, Nero's dead. Paul had to have been killed, like I said. March is the earliest I could think of. And therefore, when Peter gets this, he knows he's getting his goodbye. Because somebody would have thought, ooh, let's inform against Peter. Because at this point, when Nero's dead, all right, it takes a while for that news to go anywhere. Okay? And either Peter was already in prison, because he calls himself a doulos at this point. When he writes, where's 1 Peter? Well, this is the old doc version, but it's the same thing. Petros Apostolos. Okay, he doesn't call himself a doulos yet. He does in 2 Peter. I'm betting that he was arrested or gonna be arrested. And if he was arrested, did he know if he was going to get out or not? Because that would have been a propitious time for some local magistrate in Babylon, especially since Babylon was pro-Nero, to have arrested him. But he might not have said anything, or it was understood and was communicated, by the person who delivered Peter's letters, okay, as to what was supposed to happen. Peter not mentioning it by name because what he's doing, he's busy composing the marching song. Okay? In 2 Peter, he's blunt about knowing that he's going to die. But there's like a month transpiring between these two. Okay, so the implication is that Peter was already arrested. And it just wasn't mentioned in his first letter. Or if it's mentioned, I haven't seen it mentioned. So you can see Nero is dead in June. That takes about 2 months to get to where Peter is. Because, Babylon's kind of far away. Babylon is right next to Persia. All right. And, even though bad news travels fast, that would still take a while. Somewhere along the line, he got arrested. And if he wasn't already arrested at the time he writes 1 Peter, he's soon arrested right after. Because he already knows he's going to die here. If he knows he's going to die here, the implication is that he was already gone through a trial. Trials weren't that fast. So then the implication is that he was already arrested here, and between August and September his trial was held. Because that would be more in keeping with the way justice kind of worked. All right, back then. They were fast, but they weren't that fast. Okay. So, I can't seem to get this to round right. So, our boy Nero is dead in June 9th. Galba is marching in June of 68. From June to August, he would have just gotten the news not too long prior. Okay? He would have gotten the news about Paul. He would have gotten news about himself. He would have probably been in jail at the point that he writes this, or just newly in jail, or newly in jail after he writes. And he had just gotten news of Paul, but he himself had not been arrested yet. But you can see why. What I'm trying to throw out here is you see why this chain of events happens. Peter's a Jew, Paul was a Jew, the Jews are in insurrection, Vespasian's being sent to put down the Jews, Vespasian was in Antioch, Peter's all the way in Babylon, but Parthia, which controlled Babylon, was a big fan of Rome, and particularly a big fan of Nero. So my guess is as soon as they heard of Vindex, remember that would be March of 68, they started rounding up any potential Jews or other people who might, be considered seditious. And Peter was caught up in that. That's not far-fetched at all, considering what was going on. Okay? So by August of AD 68, when Peter writes, Galba's already on his way. The earliest anybody knows is that Galba reaches Rome by October of 68. Okay? Galba's on his way already, and he's nearly in Rome. Nero is dead. Paul is dead. Vespasian is still working out his stuff in Syria because he's waiting for Mucianus to arrive, and Mucianus doesn't get there, okay, until November of 67. So they're just starting out to work out their stuff together by the time this goes, because, they have winter, all right? And they've already done a lot of movement by the time August rolls around of 68. But they're in a holding pattern, okay? Nero's now dead as of June. Galba's not yet in Rome. They don't know what to do. And the next thing that enters into the story is that Vespasian sends Titus, kind of on a very slow journey, to sort of find out, okay, well, the new emperor is Galba, just declared in June. Titus, you go to Rome, but real slowly, because Titus basically gets as far as Macedon and Corinth. He never actually makes it to Rome. Ostensibly, he's going there to greet the new emperor and declare loyalty and all the rest of it. Okay. But he never gets that far. He turns around once he gets in, I think it was Corinth or Thrace or something like that. And he comes back to his dad Vespasian in Alexandria during this time. That's the kind of cultural and historical milieu in which Peter's writing. And you can understand now why Peter was rounded up. And you can better understand why he writes what ends up being a deathbed letter that extends Paul's prophecy, okay, by another 49 years, 49, diaspora, which is what everybody's going to go through because this is the year of the 4 emperors, all right? Now, technically, the year of the 4 emperors, of course, is a 12-month period, but you can see it started early. It started when Nero killed himself. So it's like the year and a half of the 4 emperors. And then it's really 5 if you count Nero too. All right? So you can understand why the timeline is so short between August and the end of September when 2 Peter is written. And then Peter's gone. All right? In the same year, because it changes the year number due to the autumnal equinox, 3 months after, just 3 months after, Jude is writing very close to Hanukkah. It's after Hanukkah, but it's like within a couple of days. Okay, at this point, see, the thing that's really awesome to me about this, a year after this letter is written, Paul will be dead and Vindex will have declared. And then by the time this letter is written, Nero is dead. By the time this letter is written, Galba is just about to reach Rome. By the time this letter is written, a year after this, Vespasian will be in charge. Vespasian gets crowned on the 22nd of December, 69 AD. So it's almost like God rolled these things out. So a year from the date this letter is written, you're going to remember. A year from the date this letter is written, you're going to remember. Because that's when Galba starts to enter. A year from the date this letter is written, you're going to remember. Yeah, Galba entering Rome. All based on Rome. All tied to Roman dates. And a year from here, Vespasian will be in power. That's how Bible's handling the year of the 4 emperors. It's kind of pithy, don't you think? Now, there's more to say about it, but I haven't read that far. This is as much as I can tell you. And I mean, you can read this up on your own, but I just wanted you to see how what is otherwise a boring screen really is not depicting boring activity at all. What it's depicting is pretty harrowing activity. So on the surface, this would not look like it meant anything, but obviously it does. So signing off for now. So now we come to Jude. Hanukkah. He's got to be writing on or a few days after Hanukkah. He can't be writing earlier than that. And in the doc, I explain why. Because his meter formulas only add up to that. They really center. Okay. At this point, like I said in the last increment, a year, just short of a year, after he writes, Vespasian is going to be the final emperor. And it's a big debate with the Roman historians when Vespasian started to want to be emperor. During this time, between August, when Peter wrote, and then died shortly after, or at least dying somewhere between September and Hanukkah, because that's why Jude's writing. Jude's writing to Peter to see, Peter's writing Paul's old stomping ground. Paul's dead. And then Jude's writing the people that Peter wrote, and it concatenates the group to ethnesin, which is a variant that needs to be put into our Bibles because it really fits his meter exactly. Judas Jesu Christu doulas delphos de Jacobu, tois ethnesin, enteoi patria agapa menos. That's how he starts his letter. But the ethnesin word is not in our Bibles. It's in some manuscripts. And I want to say the one that it's in is at St. Catherine's Monastery. And when I did the Jude video, I covered that. It's in the doc, so you can see it. The point is, he's writing to Peter's old stomping ground for the same reason Peter was writing in the first place. Peter's dead. You'll notice that none of them are mentioning, except at the second Peter, you have this very oblique reference to Paul in the past tense. They're not mentioning anything about current affairs. Now you can understand why. These are letters. They are couriered by some believer. If the believer gets caught, you don't want the letter to be offensive. You can see why. It's an extremely sensitive time. And besides, we're not citizens of this world. We're citizens of his world. We're not supposed to politicize here. So the letter doesn't contain any offensive content. At the same time, it's totally about what's going on. Because it's like, okay, is a prophecy going to come true now? Is a rapture going to happen? That's what Peter was about. It's very strident in 2 Peter. That's what Jude is about. Okay? The theme is still the same as Timothy, about Christian disaffection and civil war. Peter's broader when he's talking about the church state of the union, essentially, in 1 Peter. Going all the way with an extra 49, meaning that no, the rapture is not going to occur on schedule. The old schedule died. It could have still happened on time, but it didn't, and it's not gonna. And he's extending 49 more years to the end of Paul's prophecy 10 years prior. The question is whether whether Jude is extending it even further, but I don't see any evidence of that. But his whole letter is something of a doxology. So it's kind of like a swan song. The balloon might go up now. But the biggest point to take away from this is that while he's writing, nothing's happening in Jerusalem. Nothing's happening in Jerusalem because by this point, December of 68, Galba has gotten into Rome. Wellesley thinks that nobody can tell for sure when he actually got there, but he did. It's at least October. Okay. So Jude, the question is, where was Jude by the time Galba got there? Was Jude in Babylon also? Chances are pretty good because Babylon was a hotbed of Jews. Okay. Peter was there. He was an apostle to the Jews. Okay. It's very likely that Jude was there also. I don't know, and I don't trust the church fathers for anything because they lie about everything. So whatever they say, take with, several pounds of salt, not just a grain of salt. But he's going to die soon after this because you don't hear from him again. All right? You can sort of understand why. He's the brother of James, who's the brother of Christ. They're both Christ's brothers. And as far as the Romans are concerned, they're all Jews. Okay? Round them up, kill them. They could be seditious. All right? So it doesn't matter that it's a faction. He just would have been killed. And it isn't necessarily by some emperor. Galba was too busy. That's the point I'm trying to make. Galba was too busy. Okay? Way too busy. And we're going to see more about that when we get to the Gospel of Mark. So he wouldn't have been issuing any pardons, even though that's what an emperor does when he first takes office. He issues pardons. Well, there are two things about Galba that are kind of unusual. Galba didn't issue a donative to the troops, and that's would eventually get him in trouble. This is about the 25th of December, in our terms. It was a Saturnalia festival that had just begun, so that's another party month. Okay? Galba didn't do a donative to the troops, and about 40 days after Jude writes, Galba will be dead, killed by Otho, the guy he brought with him. Because Otho was expecting to be emperor next, and what basically ends up happening is that in January, Otho is going to declare a Piso guy, a guy from the Piso family, as his heir. Now, all that hasn't happened at the time Jude writes, but it happens within a couple of weeks after Jude writes. When did Jude die? I don't know. But what I do know is by the time Mark writes, just 3 months later, Jude's dead. Mark is in Rome. Was Mark still imprisoned when he wrote this? Probably. Had he just maybe been released? That's the big question. And the reason why it's such a big question is that the last letter in 2 Timothy, back in 67, March. In other words, 2 years prior to when Mark writes, almost to the day. Mark, Timothy, Luke are with Paul. Paul dies a year prior to when Mark writes, almost to the day. Okay, could be to the day, I don't know. A year after Mark writes, definitely to the day. That's when the final takedown of the temple occurs. It occurs starting on Passover of AD 70, and that's a well-attested fact anywhere you want to look on the internet. Start on Passover, ended on 9th Ave, which is what the Jews today call Tish B'Av, and that's their day of mourning for the temple going down. So Mark's picking this date to write is really pretty important. All right, and the reason why I'm pretty sure it's Passover is because of the way it plays on 14. Okay, 14 into the countdown, 40th into the Abrahamic credit, which is 14. Haha. 15th, 14th at sundown, so he plays on 15 also. 14th at sundown, you eat the lamb. That's why I think he's writing on Passover. Can I actually prove that? No. But it's a little too convenient that alone among all the other writers, he's using 14 as the date line. 14 years after Claudius and Nero and Galba, who's dead at this point, and of course Paul, and soon to be the guy who killed Galba, Otho. That's when Mark writes. See, the Lord got killed on Passover, so it's a thematic tie. All right? That's when Mark writes. And Judah's dead at this point, too. You can see why. Otho actually dies on April 16th. Passover is, it's 14 days after the vernal equinox in any year. Okay? That usually equates to our April 3rd or April 8th. April 6th. And April 8th is usually the day of first fruits, which is what we should be calling Easter, because it's 3 days after the last day. It's on the day that Passover ends, the last day of the week, Numbers 28-26, at sundown, on the last day of Passover, that's first fruits, unless that day is also a regular Sabbath, in which case you wait till the next day. And that's the first day of the counting of the Omer. The Jews get it wrong because they get everything wrong when it comes to the calendar now. Because they use lunar years. The Bible says use solar. It's in Exodus 12. So the drama of this situation is that we're talking the first week of April. No matter how you slice it, vernal equinox, 14th day, at sundown, it's the first week of April. It's just a question whether it's April 3rd or 4th or 5th or 5th. And then by April 8th or 7th or 9th is first fruits, which we should be celebrating as Easter. And it's like you count 21 days from the vernal equinox. That's Easter. So just throw out all the church fathers and throw out everybody who respects them and everybody who's trying to play those stupid games with Easter and Good Friday and all that, because those people can't read the Bible. It's very plain in Exodus 12 when Passover is. If you want to celebrate Passover on the right day, count 14 days from the vernal equinox, and then 3 more days is what you would call Easter, what should be called first fruits. Okay? Period. So you see why that theme is so evocative here when Mark writes his gospel. Now he's writing it in light of those historical circumstances. He's telling a story everybody knows. He's wrapping his text, as I've already shown in the synoptics videos, surgically around Matthew and Luke. So he's very clearly the third gospel. But what he picks to include and what he picks to exclude is based on the historical circumstances he's writing in, which is what? The siege of Jerusalem, which by AD 69, okay, is still on a delay. Because at this point, Otho is busy hightailing is either there or, well, he's already gotten there, is at Cremona, aka Brundiacum, or whatever the stupid town is called. All right, fighting against another guy who back in January of 69 said, oh, I'm actually the new emperor now, not Otho. And that other guy's name is Vitellius. So Vitellius is on his way to fight. Actually, his troops have already gotten there. And Otho's busy fighting those other troops. And Vitellius is on his way to, examine it. But by April 16th, like what, 10 days after this, after Mark writes, Vitellius is dead. I mean, not Vitellius, Otho is dead. So the 14 is really pretty significant. All right, meanwhile, Vespasian, because he doesn't know what to do with the troops and whether he should really invest Jerusalem or not, he's kind of playing footsie with that. And in the name of winter and all this other stuff, he has this little delay, and he just, sort of like builds up the supplies and the troops and the connections, and he negotiates with the Jews who still have control over Jerusalem. And he manages to find a whole bunch of time to sort of go to Alexandria, and a soothsayer tells him he's going to be doing a lot of building and be blessed in doing his building. Really big deal. And he interprets that to mean he's going to be next emperor, but he doesn't say anything. Meanwhile, Titus has come back, and our boy Vespasian and Titus are both in Alexandria at the time Mark writes. They're not in Jerusalem because it's in the name of winter. They're not doing anything. Okay? They're not doing anything. They're letting the Jews fight amongst themselves. So they're taking time off. By this point, however, Mucianus and Vespasian have sort of gotten their act together with each other, and they're now operating in concert. And the troops are much more organized and stuff like that. And what they've basically been doing during the interim is they went around Jerusalem to the south. And they took over, the fighting towns from the south, so that they could surround Jerusalem with their armies, just like Christ said they would do. All right, but they were slow about it. That's the big point. So 68 was devoted to dilly-dallying and making nice with Mucianus and them getting their act together. And, we don't know if we want to support Galba or not, but we'll pretend. But we won't really do much of anything. We'll wait for orders, and we'll go to the south, and we'll start, subduing any rebellion in the south around Jerusalem. But we'll leave Jerusalem pretty much intact and let the Jews, kill each other within Jerusalem. That's what they did. Now, the important point to take from this is that when Mark writes this letter would have gotten inside Jerusalem. He's explaining why the temple's going down. And I spent a lot of time showing how he does that by the usage of the word utus, which is one of the real prominent keyword in Mark. Okay? So this date of writing, under that historical circumstance, with the very biting gospel he has, lambasting Christians for their miracle-seeking disbelief, just like the Jews. And it's real obvious because, the temple is under siege now. Look at the judgment of God against the Jews. So Christians, you think you're going to, escape? Now that really matters, because Mark could very well be still in jail in Rome with Luke and Timothy after Paul is dead, possibly, probably jailed still, because you know what? Otho is the new emperor now. Galba is dead. As of January 15th of 69, Vitellius declared on January 3rd, Otho had to hightail it up north to northern Italy to prepare for Vitellius to do battle with his troops. So he doesn't have any time to be releasing prisoners, which is what a new emperor typically does. He didn't have time for that. He gave a donative to the troops, but you know what? He's not going to have time to sit there and care about some Jews, by the way, who are troublemakers, who call themselves Christians, but they're Jews too. So it's real likely that Mark is still in jail when he writes this, but they're very lenient at the same time. So Mark could get this out. He could write a letter and get it out. But he's not the only one. 9 months later, we know at least the writer of Hebrews got released, and the question is, who is that writer of Hebrews? Well, the starting style of the letter, the dateline style, was invented by Luke in Acts, and this book uses the same style and the same words. Luke started both the gospel and his letter, Acts, saying, I wrote you before, Theophilus, now he's not mentioning Theophilus by name. Of course, Theophilus could just be a nickname anyhow. He's saying, others have written. In other words, I'm writing too. I'm part of canon. Just like he wrote in his first 2 books. So, honey, that argues real strongly for Luke. And there are a lot of Atticisms, okay, in the book of Hebrews. And the key word for the whole book is an Attic word called kriton, better things, okay? And that's the key word of the book. Church has got better things. Why the covenant to church? He's explaining why the temple's going to go down. This is all exactly the same kind of pattern as the writings that were being written by Jeremiah and Ezekiel at the time the first temple was under siege and going down. It's the same timeline. Okay, Sheni, Hebrew word for again. All right, and that's the word that our boy, I'm saying Luke now, uses, palin, again. All right, in the very first sentence of the book of Hebrews, which tracks its entire outline for the book of Hebrews, is tracking the actual outline of the Gospel of Mark. So it helps you understand how to read the Gospel of Mark. And the book of Hebrews is all about Christians who are not in the spiritual life. It's not against the Jews. It's against Christians. Christians behaving badly, which of course was the theme of Acts, if you read it properly. Christians behaving badly in Luke's satire. And he satirizes himself. He satirizes Paul. He satirizes everybody in that book. It's a Keystone Cops thing. Well, the style of Hebrews is very sharp, very satirical, very censuring. Okay, you guys are behaving just like the Jews who are under siege. You're behaving, and you're going to go down just like they are. And that's exactly what Mark's gospel was paralleling. And that's exactly how Hebrews tracks it. He's tracking Mark chapter by chapter, sometimes, word by word, theme by theme. And I started those videos so you can watch them if you want, but really just take out the Gospel of Mark and take out the book of Hebrews and start looking at how the themes in Hebrews track to the themes in Mark, starting at the beginning. That's 9 months later. Now, Hanukkah AD 69 has another relevance. By this point, Vespasian has been emperor officially for 3 days. If we're, going by the same calendar as we have today. Because we have to call it the 25th of Kislev, which is 25th of December. Vespasian was crowned on the 22nd of December. But their 22nd of December then was really later. Because we have 10 days chopped off our calendar. All right, so it's there's a 10-day variance there. But, hello, that's close enough, don't you think? So that's the basic, essential interplay between Vespasian and the Year of the Four Emperors and these books that come out. Okay, he's writing on Hanukkah. He's saying the Lord should have been 70. Should have been, because that's his whole emphasis, what should have been versus what is. That's a very common theme, that they use the should have been Lord date to say, hi, this is what you Christians should have been, but you're not. That's exactly what Mark is doing too. Okay? His should have been death date. Okay? And you can read you can read the articles themselves to see why these dates are valid. I'm not using it for that. I'm using it to show the interplay between Vespasian's movement and the Year of the Four Emperors. Now, what I didn't cover is how did Vitellius, who right here was on his way marching down to Rome, Otho was 10 days away from killing himself, because he loses at the Battle of Brundisium, or whatever it's called, aka Second Battle of Cremona, or just before that. Second Battle of Cremona occurs as a result of him killing himself. What happened between to Vitellius between here and here? Well, Vitellius is killed on the 22nd of December. Vespasian isn't actually in Rome on the 22nd of December when he's declared emperor. His son Domitian is in Rome then. Other people who belonged to the Vespasian faction killed Vitellius. Sic transit gloria mundi, honey. Now that matters because all of a sudden you have an absence of ties to Roman history dates. This is just 21st year to mid-trib, and when the Lord should have been 70 high, the voting period is up. He could be writing as late as January of 70. Okay, it's at least on Hanukkah, no earlier. And that would be in order because, Vespasian has just been declared emperor. Vespasian is not there, though. Okay, Vitellius was killed a couple of days prior. That's the interrelationship of the timeline between these books and actual Roman history. And the idea is, as goes the Christian, so goes the nation the Christian belongs to. So if you want to be a good patriot, and you should, of your own country, learn and live on Bible. Because if you don't, this is the kind of stuff that happens. Okay? So that's pretty much all I want to say about it right now. I'm sorry it's taking me so long. There's one other thing I started to cover before, but I didn't finish. Passover, 69 AD. Mark being with Luke and Timothy and Paul. Paul being executed probably right around Passover of 68. They had a policy in Roman law that if you are incarcerated and you haven't actually been charged and your sentence hasn't been passed for 2 years, that's a kind of statute of limitations, at which point you should be released. That could be what happened here. It could also be that since you're talking about a third emperor, namely Otho, being in charge from January, and a guy named Vitellius up north in Lower Germany, or Upper Germany, I forget which, declaring himself emperor also in 69, that Otho might have said, okay, political prisoners, they get to be released. If you were imprisoned by Nero, you're let go. That makes a lot of sense. Otho did do a donative. I don't know what it was, but there was one. That's what he had promised for those who supported him. It would have been real easy to think, well, let's free some prisoners too. And somebody could have put in a good word for Mark and Luke, or somebody else could have said, well, gee, we got a new emperor now. He's just gone away up to Cremona. This guy's been languishing for a year. Okay, we haven't charged him, and we don't have any time to charge him. Mark, Luke, and Timothy. Let's let him go. So he could have been let go here by Passover AD 69. That's before the statute of limitations is up. But you'll notice, in a way, that dates back to 2 years also. I'm not sure which it's going to be. See, Paul lost his first defense back in March of 67. So, March of 67. Mark is writing his gospel 2 years later. It could have been that he and Timothy and Luke were all released because the 2 years was up. Paul ended up getting sentenced, but they didn't. If they didn't and the 2 years is up, then they have to be let go. So it didn't necessarily have to be an emperor pardoning them. It could just be because the 2 years is up. I've said that before, but it ends up mattering a lot because everybody, well, the stupid church fathers, they never get anything right. They think that Paul wrote the book of Hebrews. No way. No way. Paul was never shy about saying who he was. These guys don't bring it up. It's understood who they are. But even in, if Paul was on the chopping block, which he already was in March of 67, he had no compunction about saying who he was and who he was writing to. These guys are hedging it. So that tells you a lot. It's not Paul. The style's not Paul. The writing's not Paul. It's obviously somebody who was trained by Paul. That's all you can say. Well, here are your candidates: Mark, Timothy, and Luke. Except that in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 23, it says Timothy has been released. And the implication is that they're waiting for him to come to them, or that they're waiting to go to him. They're in Italy. The writers, plural, are in Italy. And hopefully will be coming to whoever's the addressee soon. Okay. Now, I did a lot more on the Hebrews doc. It got revised. Okay. To show some of this stuff because I didn't make it as clear as I could have. Here's the doc where you can download it. And in that doc, I traced out the we references to show that it's not an editorial we. Certainly some of the references are. But what I did is I documented the ones that aren't to show that there are two writers. Okay, one who's like the actual writer and the other one who's with him. I bet money now, especially after seeing this, that the actual writer is Luke. It's got that same confidence. It's got that same suavity. It's got this, and it's got the bite. Mark wrote in a biting manner too, but he was not, his writing style anyway. I mean, not that he was restricted to one writing style, but Mark's writing style didn't have the refinement. The quickness, yes. The refinement, no. The satire, yes. The refinement, no. That Luke uses. And since there are a lot of Atticisms in Hebrews, and Luke used a lot of Atticisms in Acts, and to a certain extent, I guess, in his gospel too, I'm betting money that it's Luke. Okay? The confident assertion of authority there is really strong. It's a calm, confident, I know you're respecting me, and here's what I'm telling you. Now that really matters because, as far as I know, Luke was a Gentile. He might have been a convert to Judaism. But the audience he's writing to, see, this is what's so critical about this. This letter went into Jerusalem. And what you need to understand is that Jerusalem, because of all the stuff that happened, it was under siege, but nobody wanted to take it down. So they were allowing letters inside. And if anybody actually opened the letter before it got inside, any Roman, okay, seeing this letter, this is written invoking Jeremiah, for crying out loud. And Jeremiah said, give in. Jeremiah said, don't keep on resisting. And that's really a theme in the book of Hebrews. So they would have let it in. They would have let Mark's gospel in. It's not against the Romans. There's no condemnation of Rome in there. Or in here. If anything, it's saying, give up, give in. Your kingdom doesn't belong to the politics. All right? That's the first thing. But the biggest thing I want to stress is that sometime between Passover, if not at Passover, and Hanukkah, when this is written, they got out. And at Hanukkah, that's when Timothy gets out. Why Timothy ended up being later? Well, here's what you can say about Timothy. Is that they held him for some reason, who knows what. because he was from Asia Minor, maybe, until, his statute ran out. Why would his statute run out in Hanukkah? Well, maybe it didn't. Or maybe it ran out sooner, but for some reason there was a glitch. I don't know. But you got Mark and Luke and Timothy as your most promising candidates. And since Timothy is mentioned by name as just being released, and Timothy didn't write the letter, that leaves Mark and Luke. Now, can you establish the writer style better than just what I said? Of course. And you should. That's good scholarship. That's what textual criticism is all about. There are contenders out there who are scholars who maintain that Luke or Mark wrote Hebrews. I haven't looked them up to find out what they got to say. So maybe you will. I don't know when I'm going to get to that. But the point is that, there's been all this needless debate about when these books were written and what's the chain of events. And hopefully one of the things I've been able to accomplish is to show you it's more than plausible, the chain of events that I'm, what do you want to call it, sketching. I am not a scholar. I don't like criticizing scholars, but there are good scholars and bad scholars, and the good scholars are probably not getting their voices heard. Because I'll bet you money I'm not the only one to notice these things. I can't be. If a dumb brainout can notice it, somebody else has noticed it too. And what I've been trying to do over the last 15 years is to find who else knows this meter. I can't be the only one. It's driving me crazy. I hate being the only source for something. I love depending on scholars. Okay, but I can't find any. Now, if you know of one, please let me know. And if you are one, and maybe you're writing your dissertation or something, or thinking about writing it, here's some potential topics to write about. Because, honey, the scholarship in Christianity really needs it. We got the bad scholars have had the majority voice for too long. And they're replacement theologians, they're Reformed, they're Catholic. And I really don't have anything against the people who are Catholic or Calvinist. I don't have anything against anybody. But when you trash the Bible, when you obfuscate the Bible, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to be nice to dear Dr. So-and-so and be nasty to the Bible. Okay? The Bible's got its own story to tell. And hopefully you've seen by now that story is pretty significant. And there's a whole lot to support the arguments that I'm making from the text itself. That's my authority. That's the scholar, the Bible. Am I misinterpreting it myself? Well, that's a debatable question. I've disclosed everything I can find to show you why I'm finding and saying what I'm saying. And if I make a mistake, it ought to be obvious somewhere. God ought to make it clear. But if I die tonight, I have no regrets. I did my homework. Peace out.